So welcome to 10-Minute Record Reviews, and this is number 8. I'm going to talk about John Coltrane and Johnny Hartman's album called John Coltrane and Johnny Hartman. This is an album which came out on Impulse in 1963. I've got the 1986 re-release on Impulse, which sounds pretty good, I have to say. What can you expect from this album? Well, it's interesting. This album is an album of ballads. It's an album of vocal jazz. John Coltrane is obviously clearly playing on this album, but he is not the dominant sound of the album. He's backed by by the other three members of his classic quartet. But the album is largely a vehicle for Hartman as much as it is for John Coltrane, and it is a very different sounding John Coltrane record than the kind of work that he was doing simultaneously with his quartet when they were playing live, moving towards free jazz and spiritual jazz. And this is a much more, if you want, a mainstream. In fact, it's the last truly mainstream jazz recording that John Coltrane would make. So the context for this album, so as I mentioned, here Coltrane is with the other members of his classic quartet. So you've got McCoy Tyner playing piano, you've got Elvin Jones playing wonderful drums, and you have Jimmy Garrison on bass. And they're joined by Johnny Hartman. Now Johnny Hartman, there are different kinds of stories. It was never really properly established exactly how he and Coltrane first crossed paths. Hartman, at this point, by 1963, he was a singer in the kind of the post-war bebop era. But over time, jazz vocalists begin to fall out of favor, and instrumental jazz, with the rise of Miles Davis and Coltrane and others, begins to dominate the jazz market. And Hartman had not really reinvented himself. It was difficult to do so as a jazz vocalist at that time. And so he kind of lost his way by the early 60s. So one version has it that Coltrane and Hartman, who both played with Dizzy Gillespie at different points, had met each other through Gillespie. Another version has it that Coltrane basically came across Hartman singing at a club in Harlem and was really taken by his tone. He's on the record as saying that Hartman is one of the only singers that he sort of really felt a connection with musically, and he was the very first choice when his label Impulse, slightly concerned commercially at the prospect for where Coltrane was going as he began to move further and further out and get more and more experimental in the early 60s, pressured him to make some albums that were going to sell, and he made 3 albums that were going to sell, that were more commercially oriented around this time. He makes ballads with his quartet. He makes an album with Duke Ellington, which is a wonderful album itself, and he makes this record, and it's and surprising a lot of people with his choice of singer. There are and I guess consistent with picking a jazz vocalist like Hartman, this is not an album of a bunch of Coltrane originals, understandably, because he wasn't really writing songs at that point that had lots of lyrics to them. This is an album basically of this. There are all the songs here are standards. One of them Coltrane is revisiting. That's Lush Life, which he had played before. But this is a much different version of that particular song. So the music kicks off with "They Say It's Wonderful," which is and right away there's something special happening. This is a masterful performance from Hartman. His baritone is so smooth all the way through this record. It just takes you away. And incidentally, this is a great album. This is a great album just for listening, just for the pure quality of the music. But it's also a great, if you're looking for a jazz album to throw on during a dinner party, this is another good example, because it is very appealing to lots of people, and it never intrudes very much. It's quite intimate, and very mellow pretty much all the way through. This Hartman is clearly rising to meet the occasion, recognizing, he's got not just the classic quartet, but the production crew as well, Bob Thiele and also Rudy Van Gelder, the engineer par excellence, which also explains why this album sounds so fantastic, as so many of Coltrane's albums on Impulse do. There's restrained, sympathetic playing on this song by all the musicians. Coltrane is, when he comes in, is still obviously Coltrane, but interestingly, you can always tell it's him playing whenever he's playing, but the attack is much softer than it normally is when he comes into the song, and that is maintained relatively consistently. Perhaps it's only in the very last song of the album where he deviates from that. Second song, Dedicated to You. Hartman is still just absolutely crushing it. It's amazing to hear Coltrane's tonal playing here, because so much of what he was playing at this point was not, was if not atonal, certainly was on that trajectory. This is again the last juncture where he really is doing this. My One and Only Love is the third song and the last song on side one. It begins with this glorious mellow solo from Coltrane. It's the first point of the album, strangely enough, where I felt that he really takes center stage, although he has soloed in the other songs to date. The tempo picks up. Hartman doesn't actually join this song for quite a while, but the tempo picks up when he does. But it's still a ballad. It's a simple little love song, and it's really, this is baby making music. Really, it is. Side 2 begins with Lush Life, as I mentioned, a song which Coltrane is revisiting. It's unrecognizable from his earlier version, needless to say, and there's a wonderful accompaniment by McCoy Tyner on this song, accompanying Hartman singing. Coltrane solos as he does. Elvin Jones comes in and really picks up the tempo. Very clever playing by Jones here. He's not soloing necessarily because Coltrane's playing as well, but the drums are really taking the spotlight. It's a clever little tap dance of a drum accompaniment here. Really worth listening to multiple times. That particular certainly the latter part of that song. Side 2 continues with You Were Too Beautiful, which is a lovely song amongst a bunch of lovely songs. This song feels like the soundtrack to some bittersweet movie scene that is yet to be made, in which you might star in your mind. It really is full of melancholy. It's great, and there's a wonderful solo by McCoy Tyner here, who is stepping out for the most significant moment he has on the record on this particular song. And then it closes out with Autumn Serenade. This is the songs on side, for much of the album, have been quite mellow. A heavy emphasis on ballads. This is not a ballad. This is a rumba. You could clearly dance to this song, and I found it. Even though the music on this album is very beautiful, this was a nice sort of mood lifter after some of the more melancholy songs that we've had so far. It's smooth. It's danceable. It's got a great solo by Coltrane, which is unlike a lot of his playing in the rest of the album. He's for the only time in his album that I think he really sort of shows off his technical prowess, as opposed to his lyricism, and restraint, which is what I guess had been on show before. So this is the last conventional, standards-focused album that Coltrane would ever make, and it's the best album that Johnny Hartman was ever involved in. So it's this odd couple who produce a minor classic here. I give it 4 stars, no higher, because I felt it's a bit on the short side. There's only about 30 minutes of music here, and the formula that they use, with the exception of the last song, does not vary too much. So if it's not essential, though, it's certainly. It's a significant milestone in Coltrane's career, and for that reason, it would be a significant album in any jazz collector's collection of music. So, thanks for listening.